you were a reporter in East Europe. Did you have in Hungary a favorite place, or did you have here friends?
Oh yes, I have not many friends, but I have had various friends over the years, and I have been coming to Hungary for ages. I came the first time in the 60s, mid to late 60s. I always had a very special relationship, I think, to Hungary. It goes back to 1956, when I was a 13-year-old boy at a very normal school in Copenhagen. And I was just about sort of becoming a curious teenager. And then something started happening in a country far away. And fortunately, in those days we had good schools. So we began discussing, what is Hungary? What is happening? What are the Russians doing there? What is all this about? And in the big pause before the noon meal, everybody assembled in the schoolyard. Loudspeakers were put up. The school director explained what has been happening throughout the day and the night. In Hungary, that country we found on the map, it took weeks. We went on and on and on with Hungary. And it dawned upon me, there's a bigger world outside Copenhagen and outside Denmark. So it was very important for me to go and find out about this. So I started fairly as a late teenager, traveling where I could. And I came up once from Greece and passed Hungary and made on purpose a stop in Budapesti and walked around with a map trying to find the places where the fighting had been taking place. And in that sense, I slowly educated myself into believing I'm not only a Dane. Of course I'm a Dane. I'm a Dane every day. But I am certainly also a European. And that led me into journalism. And in 1980, I was transferred to a very prestigious and beautiful job as a correspondent in London. And after some years, it dawned upon me there, Central Eastern Europe, there's something going to happen very soon. So I convinced my chief editors that I should transfer to Vienna. I came to Vienna. They said sort of, what do I want to do there? I said, you wait and see. It's going to be interesting. So I went and I said, I will write about Central Europe. Central Europe? What is that? So I tried to explain to them, we have East Europe and West Europe. East Europe sort of belongs to the Russians, poor them. West Europe belongs to America, and we are lucky with that. But where is the center? Where is Europe? So I thought my main thing was to go to Central Europe and from my base in Central Europe find out what is Europe. Where is Europe? Why is it Europe? Who are the Europeans? What are we doing? And I then wrote this book, The Europeans, and I would say it is based really on my experiences, my memoirs, including bad things like I covered the Balkan Wars from the first to the last day, but also beautiful days like the day when the communists gave up power here and the Democratic Republic came back into life. I was on the square in front of the parliament. It was one of my greatest days. It was a lovely day. And I mean, there were lots of moving stories all over. Europe is a moving story. It has a moving history, but it's also a story which goes on and on and on. I don't belong to the pessimists. I think we have survived 1,500 years of, I call it normally, European civil war. We will make it to a united Europe before the end of this century. And this does not mean that everybody is going to be the same. Europe is diversity. We are hundreds of different cultures. and we have to live within the same European framework. But if we try to erase these cultures, we will be poorer and poorer. So the more difference we can have in Europe, the better. The richer we are, the stronger we are. So this means, I mean, of course, there are great differences between the Hungarians and the Danes and the Finns and the Portuguese. But we are all Europeans, we are all united in that. And this is what I think is the great thing about Europe. It's not like America, it's not like Russia. We have a lot of history. Now we are getting to know ourselves. There are troubles along the road, surely. But if you see what kind of progress we have been making since the Second World War, no war since. And then after 1989, the beginning unification of Europe. I think it's a great story. I love Europe.
If I say so, that is your opinion, that the biggest achievement of the 20th and 21st century's history in Europe is the European Union? That's the greatest achievement in Europe.
Yes, I think I would agree to that. The EU is not perfect. I sat on the EU Commission's Cultural Committee for 1 year, and I left it in despair. One of my friends on that committee was your famous landsman, Georgi Conrad, whom I like very much. But he was one of the few ones who was invited from what we might call the center and the east to join. The EU is still shamefully much concentrated on the West and don't understand the East and don't understand the center very well. This is a kind of arrogance on the part of the West Europeans. I'm very much against that, and I've been writing against it. And sometimes, of course, I'm also being criticized for doing so. But we also in the center and the east we see particular interest, national interest, which I think we should overcome. We all have to feel that we belong to one Europe. And being members of the EU does not mean that we should try to take as much money and other advantages away from the EU, but actually that we should contribute to the EU, expand the EU. Now we should start talking also maybe about Ukraine as a member, Moldova as a member, in a little bit further out in the horizon, White Russia, Belarus becoming a member. We should not be afraid. We should be open-minded. We should enjoy the Europeanness of all of us. And, of course, the EU there is the motor of it. But it's a little bit like an old Trabant. It doesn't run very well. We must, and that should not be misunderstood, we must turn it into maybe a Mercedes. But it will take time. It will come. What was I thinking of there? And this should include also that we learn to defend ourselves. We have very serious troubles in the south and in the east. And we must wake up to this. And we have the capacity for it. And then I have been toying with an idea. I was back in Brussels only about a week ago. I will write a column in the near future where I suggest we must start thinking of moving the EU away from Brussels. It was okay in the old days, but the EU should now probably be concentrated in what I will call the tree city of Vienna, Budapest and Prague. And then we could probably think of moving the NATO headquarters to Warsaw. And a while ago I was in Kiev, and I was sitting in this Table Hotel Ukraine in Kiev, where you had the view out to the great square. And there was a big, modern, burned out structure at the end of the square. So I asked the waiter in the dining room, "What is that?" "Oh," he said, "I hope very much this is the future center of NATO's East Command." And he was a good European. We should all think in this direction. There's nothing to be afraid of. We have a great culture. We have, 500 million of highly educated, healthy people. There's nowhere else in the world with the same potential. We have to develop the potential. And this is actually what I'm writing about in my book.
And what is your opinion of immigration in Europe? That's a great problem or a great opportunity or possibility?
The immigration is a political problem, partly because the politicians, and I am not a great admirer of very many politicians in Europe. The politicians don't have the quality, the answer, they have not been thinking it through. They are reacting from situation to situation, from every terrible loss of life to the next terrible loss of life. Immigration as such, well, we are all immigrants. The Hungarians were immigrants 1,000 years ago, and I think they are wonderful Europeans. We should not be intimidated by what is undoubtedly, in real terms, large numbers of people. But again, and I was just mentioning it, we have 500 million people within the EU. Okay, can we not integrate maybe on an annual basis 1%? I don't know, but I cannot imagine that it is impossible. Large stretches of our cities, our inner cities, are now empty. We may, I don't know how to do it. And I can see a political problem because people will not accept it. But people in general are not against foreigners. Certainly not the foreigners they know, their neighbors maybe. I see it in Copenhagen. The best newspaper kiosks in Denmark are run by Pakistanis or say Algerians. The greengrocers are wonderful. They are all sort of Syrians and Turks. So we have to accept that Europe was always a continent of immigrants. And we learn from the immigrants. They add to our already many cultures. There is, of course, a problem with poverty and with crime. But if we just push these people away from us, well, what are they? Then they end up in poverty and they have to live somehow, so they will turn to crime. We need quality politicians to deal with this, and we don't have them. The politicians are afraid of a public opinion, and they run after this public opinion and they reinforce it rather than lead as statesmen. I cannot see one single really inspiring political leader in Europe today. When you look back, we had people like Konrad Adenauer in Germany, we had de Gaulle in France, we had Paul-Henri Spaak in Belgium, we had Alcide de Gasperi in Italy. I am not complaining about the dirt of political leadership in East and Central Europe, because what you had here was mostly put in prison or they were killed simply. The only great name, I think, emerging out of the former communist countries would be Václav Havel. And he was in the Czech Republic. And he was not even popular among the Czechs. He was popular in the West. I met President Göns here. He was, I think, a wonderful man. I loved him. Father figure. But was he a statesman? That I don't know. But I'm sure he could come up with some thoughts about how do we solve this refugee problem, if it is a refugee problem, in a human way. And we must start, I think, talk in terms and think in terms of humanity rather than of figures. I would say principally, but of course not always in praxis, every single human being has something to give us, to give the rest of us. The art, the difficulty is to getting it out and make it useful for all of us.
You say we have to be open-minded, and you wrote in your book that we have to be critical with ourselves, and you said that is the principle of Europe. And what means to you? What means to you to be an European?
To be critical? No, certainly not. To be European is to be, yes, critical. But it is also to be critical not only of power, but also of yourself. To be critical in the way you approach other people, in the way you approach maybe your work. I love my work. And I think I have worked very hard. And I work still very hard on words. I am critical with my writing. But more than that, European means to be, yes, open-minded, human-minded. It means to accept that we are all different and that it is good for us to be different. Whatever that difference is, what we, of course, must be very careful with is being tolerant. No, that is not what I mean. It must be, to be weak vis-à-vis crime. And this includes political crime. This includes abuse of political powers. But we must realize and work within the society, which comprises all of us. Those who have benefited most from it, others who have benefited less, and those who have benefited most should actually try, maybe, to be more understanding of those who have benefited less. We have a society. We should have a society of equal chances, but not of equality. But that does not mean that we exclude those who cannot really make it. This, I think, is very much a European sentiment. The state I hope we will arrive at is a kind of federated Europe built on law and humanity and tolerance.
You traveled a lot in Europe, and you spoke a lot of people. What was the most shocking, or the most beautiful, or the most emotional moment during your journey?
There were so many. It is almost impossible to say, but I will say that much. Most of the most important human moments occurred in the center and in the east. A great day for me was, as I already mentioned, the day where the communists gave up power here and managed to transfer peacefully power to the new democratic Hungary. And another very moving day, long before that, was when I found the grave of Notch and the other revolutionaries in a terrible corner of a cemetery, which name I have forgotten, and even if I remembered it, I wouldn't be able to say it. But there they were. This was where all the trash of the cemetery had ended up. And I arrived at the cemetery. It had been pointed out to me by some nice friends, and they said, it's up there. So I went in, and I spoke to the guard. Yeah, he was not, but then he said, that direction, and then but he was right, and there it was. And I met a young man out there who was putting a bouquet of flowers, and he said, I believe this is my grandfather. And of course, another fantastic episode, which is also in the book. I had read about a Ukrainian who, as the Nazi Germany troops invaded Ukraine, fled up to the loft of the poor house in central Ukraine where he was born. And he was too young to join the communist partisans, and maybe also he was a bit of a coward. He didn't come down from the loft, he stayed there. So, as the Russians, or say the communists, came back, he remained on the loft. He didn't dare come down. So he stayed there for the rest of his life. And I read about it, only in 91 did he come down. He was now an old man. And I thought, I'm going to see him. So I found him with great difficulty in a terrible hut. Poor, in the deep winter of Ukraine. But there he was. And we spoke together, naturally via a Ukrainian friend, who later on said to me, I didn't realize that there were people in Ukraine so poor as him. But there he was. So we went on, and he talked about his life. And then at the end of it, I said to him, what kind of a life was this? Oh, he said, and he was old and decrepit, and water was running out of his eyes, and oh, he said, I lived the life God gave me. So, I mean, what do you do? This is human life, and it is a European life. And there were dozens of these things. Although I was never really interested in politics. I mean, politics is a necessity, but it's also some kind of sickness. And even mostly among journalists, we are all into power, politics, and that. I like to go into, let's say, the human story, but a kind of human story which gives us a background we can live on. And this was always what was behind my writing. Of course, I mean, when here in the late 80s, I wrote about the political infighting in Budapest or in Poland or the Czechoslovakia as it then was. And of course, I mean, in the Balkans. But I was always much more interested in the human, the serious human life behind the whole thing.
How the pictures were made to your book? The photographer traveled with you or us?
I'm very glad that you put that question. Very glad indeed. The photographer is a very close friend, and especially in those days. He is a Dane, and we have done 2 books together because really that book is also his, and his name is Carsten Ingemann. He is now getting on in age. He's somewhat younger than me. He's not a press photographer anymore. He is trying to become an artistic photographer. He is having a certain luck with it, but I think it's difficult. But he is a wonderful human being, as you can see from the pictures. And he feels very close to human beings. And on top of it, he's very inspiring to travel with. So we made all this together. We traveled first. Our first book was a Danish book simply called Denmark. And then a little bit by coincidence, we got started on this, the European book. And he has a very quaint sense of humor, of paradoxes. He is an artist concerning illustrations. He sees things that other people don't see, and he is excellent in photographing them. On top of it, he is also moved by what he sees. I was not present there, but he was in Albania in another city. We have been traveling in Albania also, but he was in Albania in a situation where I was not present. And in the middle of the whole thing, he found a family which had nothing. So he bought them a cow. So at least they had milk for the kids. And he made some kind of arrangement which meant that they couldn't really sell the cow. So they had to keep the cow on a plot of grass and then sort of get milk out of it. I mean, he was like that, and he is like that. He's a wonderful man, and his name is Carsten Ingemann.
And the last question. Have you mentioned in one of your interview that you have an offer to make a book about USA? Are you working on this book?
Yes and no. My wife and I, spent 3 months in the US in 2014. She had never been there. I was there quite a lot in the 60s and 70s. And then I never went back. I cannot say that I lost interest in the United States. I'm very grateful to the United States for what the United States has done to Europe. But other people took care of that. I was interested in Central Europe, which nobody in Western Europe really concentrated on. So I said to myself, we will go for the election campaign. And it was a futile attempt at meeting my youth, because we did what I did in 1964. We traveled by bus and by train for 3 months all over the continent. It nearly killed me. I actually got very sick. And there were a lot of very interesting experiences. And I filled a notebook. And I also started writing it. And I may return to it. So if you can find me a Hungarian publisher, I will do it. But meanwhile, I got maybe into another book which could turn out to be a novel. But I have to say, by the way, I am busy with my column every Sunday in my newspaper. And we're traveling and sort of gathering atmosphere and so on. But I started, and as a matter of fact, I have made a bit more progress with that. I think I started a real novel. It's going to be a fairly thick one. One aspect of which, but it's not the main aspect. It's the main aspect is something happening between Denmark and Germany. And say, no, that's not true. Denmark and, say, the German-speaking civilizations. Because Austria plays a role. And because Austria plays a role in the narrative, Hungary plays a role. I don't know if I will go into this question here, but this is a mystery to me. In 1864, Germany and Austria-Hungary declared war on Denmark for interesting reasons which are not important here. And I never understood why the Austrians, representing a multi-ethnic empire, would declare war on the crumbling multi-ethnic, multinational, multicultural empire of Denmark, supporting the rather aggressive, growing national state of Prussia and then Germany. I mean, I found it, a strategic failure. Could they not think in Vienna? Sometimes you have a feeling they can't. So, but what is even worse, what are the Hungarian troops doing in Denmark? Of course, they are coming on with the Austrians. But there must have been here and in Vienna thinking Hungarians, politicians, statesmen even, saying Hungary is not going to fight in Denmark. What the devil are we going to do there? But the fact of the matter is, and I have seen it on the War History Museum in Vienna, the Hungarian troops are making at least as far up in Jutland as to the city of Vejle. That's quite a considerable march. But the Hungarian soldiers there, they were, what are we doing here? Who is the enemy? But, if there is a Hungarian historian who will talk to me about that, I would be very grateful. I never understood it. And when I ask in Vienna, people are sort of wishy-washy. They don't know really. They don't care. It's a very small episode. Yes, it is. But from my point of view, Hungarian soldiers fighting in Denmark in 1864, come off it.
Thank you for the interview.
Most welcome. Thank you very much to you. Thank you.